sallim ala Sayyidina Muhammad. So we only have now the last 40 minutes, and I've only got through the first section of the 4 areas where the maqasid are, but I'm just going to quickly run through to give you snippets of some of the other ones. So the second section was قصد الشارع في وضع الشريعة للإفهام, in terms of the revelation of the Sharia and the objectives in terms of understanding. Like, how are we to understand the Sharia? What are the objectives of how did Allah intend to have us understand the Sharia? And the first thing that he points out is that this Sharia is an Arabic Sharia. Not an Arab Sharia, not Shari'atun Arabi, Arabiyatun in the sense that like it's for Arabs, but it was revealed in the Arabic language. And this is very important to note, because especially now with the advent of translations of the Quran and translations of the Hadith and translations of the book of Fiqh, a lot of people are engaging with the primary sources, with the Sharia, in a non-Arabic language. And so one of the maqasid of the Sharia is that it was intended to be revealed in Arabic. And there's a number of ayahs, right? We have revealed this Quran as an Arabic Quran and so forth. So Imam al-Shatibi is calling our attention to saying, there's the majority of scholarship, the majority of Muslims are not Arab by race, but their engagement with the Sharia is in the Arabic language. And this is really important to note, because especially as people attack the Sharia, a lot of it is because they're looking at translations or they're not seeing what that word means. And so for us to try to align the ruling and what we're deriving from the Sharia with the hikmah, we have to go back to the Arabic language. And not only the Arabic language, but also how the Arabs use that language. That was also very important. So it's not just that we have a Jahili poet that we can use as an example of this is how the Arabs, this is what that word means. We also have to look at how did the Arabs at that time use that word. And this is what they were constantly looking around for. Ibn Abbas, there was one word in the Quran that he didn't understand, because of course there's words in other dialects, even things from other languages that have come into the Arabic language, like bustan, right? Bustan is in the Quran, right? Bustan. It's not an originally Arabic word. What does it sound like? Stan. Persian. Bu. What is bu? What? Good smell or flower, right? So the land of good smelling flowers. Bustan. That was included. So you'll see it as it'll say Farisiyun Mu'arrabun. It's a Persian word that has become Arabic. But we have to see that if at the point of revelation, how was the Arabic being used? What were some of the customs, and how did that play into the Sharia? So that's a very important discussion. And he goes on. There's a number of, but I'll just summarize it at that we have to go back to understanding the maqasid of the Sharia. We have to do it in the Arabic language as the Arabs at that time understood it, not modern standard Arabic. We have to go back to the way they understood it. And this is not an easy task. There was one man, he came to our teacher, Murabat al-Hajj, and he's a native Arabic speaker. Land of the poets, Mauritania is called Ardu Milyon Sha'ir, the land of 1,000,000 poets. The population is 2 million, so that tells you about, and I used to see little kids do Jahili Shi'r battles. And this is not something specific to Mauritania. Other countries, the Arab children would get involved in poetry contests from a very young age. But this person asked Murabat al-Hajj, he said, can I just do tafsir on my own? I understand Arabic. He said, وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. The najm and the shajar make prostration. What is the najm there? What does it mean? Stars? Everybody in the room is pretty clear, right? Stars, najm. It doesn't mean stars, it means vines. Because look at Surah Al-Rahman. Everything is pairs. هذا ملح أجاج وهذا عذب فرات. The mashriqain and the maghribain, the jinn and the ins. Everything is pairs. Then we get to tree and stars. How is that? But the Arabs used to call الشجرة التي لا ساق لها. If you look at the tafsir of Imam al-Suyuti, when it comes to najm, he says the shajar in the kalam of the Arab was the tree that stood on its own with a trunk. The tree, what the Arab used to call a shajara, because the Arab, don't they call for grape, they call shajaratul inab. They'll call it a grape tree. In English we call it a grapevine. But the Arabs used to say if there was a tree that cannot stand on its own, that it has to have, it was, it's غير معروشات, meaning that it's a vine, like the creeping Sharia vine, right? We have to stand it up so that it can, they would call that a najm. So now you see, like, oh wow, now it makes sense. The siyaq of the kalam, it's all pairs. وَالنَّجْمُ وَالشَّجَرُ يَسْجُدَانِ. The vines and the trees, both type of trees, are in prostration to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he gave him a pop quiz that's saying, even though you know Arabic, you have to understand how the Arabs at that time use the Arabic. Another point that he mentions here, according to Imam Shatibi, he says that the Sharia is an illiterate Sharia, meaning that it has to be accessible to the people who are not lettered. وهو الذي بعث في الأميين رسولا فآمنوا بالله ورسوله النبي الأمي. That this is the illiterate prophet. Now there was an Ibn Ashur, who is a relatively recent person who also did development of looking into the Maqasid. He objected to this, saying no, there's plenty of proof that this is not necessary. The Sharia is not placed down to be only accessible to the illiterate people. I'm not going to get into the discussion here, but that's just something to think about. Like, do the rulings have to be accessible to all people, or can you make the Sharia dependent on literacy? And as an example, something that does come up, moon sighting, right? There's a practical application to that. And what are the two sides of the debate? Either we look for the moon, or what? Calculations. Now, if we make the Sharia ruling dependent on calculations, are we depending it on literacy? Yes. Can an ignorant Bedouin man that doesn't know how to say alif la, read alif ba ta, can he go out to the sky and look at the sky and look for the moon? That's accessible to everybody. So that's where now the understanding the maqsad is going to have an effect on the final ruling. And so to me, the reality is preservation of the community a maqsad according to everybody? That's interactions, right? So we shouldn't let this matter of debate have ourselves what's that? Thank you. Engrossed with each other in debate about it. Who's ever been to Fas in Morocco? The Qarawiyyin Masjid. You've been there? Have you been to inside the masjid? Not inside the masjid. Has anybody been inside the masjid? Where? You have, right? Which way do they pray to the Qibla? You didn't pray there? Okay. So if you look, they're actually, some are praying directly with the wall of the masjid, and some are praying at a 45-degree angle this way. And you go in there and people are making their nafilas two different directions. Why? Because the masjid was established during the time when the Fatimids were still in rule there, and they decided on the Qibla. Later, when it became a Sunni institution, they very early on they took issue with the Qibla, but now the issue became, is the Qibla we're going to ascertain by calculation, or is the mihrab of a major Muslim city enough of a proof? Because the mihrab of a masjid, is that something accessible to everybody, literate or illiterate? So that mihrab, is it a proof? According to those scholars, it says, look, they established this masjid, they prayed like this for hundreds of years, doesn't matter if it's 45 degrees off, that's the Qibla. Others of people are saying, no, we can actually establish this proof by looking at the sun. And I'm of that opinion too, because I looked and it's very southeast. It's like if you go with the mihrab of Qarawiyyin, which is the oldest university in the Muslim world, it's facing South Africa. Look at on a Google Maps, it's way off. Nobody has any issues with it. Try praying at this masjid. What's going to happen here? Yeah, big time. So that's showing us that that's an example of where people are not understanding the maqsad of the Sharia. Look, if somebody wants to follow East Qibla, is it a big deal? No. Somebody wants to follow Northeast and go over there, is it a big deal? At the end of the day, we're both praying, right? The maqsad is for you to worship Allah and have humility before Allah. So if somebody feels comfortable getting out their app and facing the Qibla this way, and the other person feels comfortable with an illiterate Sharia based, because that's where the difference, and people are going to go, you can use calculations? No, it has to be accessible by everybody. So this is a debate even at the maqsad level, but above that, the unity of the community, and what's the even higher objective of that maqsad is your humility before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if we're supposed to be humble before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through this action of worship and facing the Qibla, which prepares us for that prayer, but we cause a fitna in the masjid, are we affecting that original maqsad? That's where the problem comes in. So now this is where we can start engaging with asking, like, is it really that important? I'm going to skip through a lot of this, but he spends a lot of time discussing the idea of the Arabs and the Arab Sharia and synonyms and how words can be used. And in some of the hadith I mentioned, you can see like the idea of fima haruma alayha, in what has been haram upon. What exactly do we mean by in that hadith? So the second section, which is about the understanding of the Sharia, goes about a lot of discussion about the Arabic language and the Arabic customs and what was common amongst the Arabs. The third section, which is like, what is the what do we say? The responsibility of the mukallaf. Like, what do you have to do? And I think this is one of the reasons why I wanted to scroll down to this section, which is, this is really important, that as the Sharia, okay, one of the maqsad of the Sharia is not to change who you are. Not to change you at your root, at your tabi'ah. So at one level, do we have an inclination towards food and drink and other basic necessities, right? So the Sharia is not saying, no, you should go against that. And what did the Prophet ﷺ tell some of the Sahaba that wanted to actually literally castrate themselves so that they didn't have those inclinations? What did he tell them? So I get married. So this is not so he's teaching them the maqsad of the Sharia is not to annihilate that aspect of yourself. Allah created that within you. The maqsad of the Sharia, and this is another of the maqasid, is to prevent people from following hawa, which is desires. But again, this is the way that it's used in the Sharia. What's another word for desire in Arabic? Raghba. What else? Starts with a sheen. Shahwa, right? So shahwa and hawa, they both mean desire. This is why earlier I said, we have to be careful about translating words. So because if we translate both of those words into desire, now we're going to misunderstand this maqsad, which is the Sharia is there to prevent you from following your desires. The Sharia, one of the maqsad of the Sharia is to prevent you from following your desires, but not your shahwa, your hawa. And the way that's spelled is Ha-wa alif maksura. And an interesting acronym, or I don't know if it's an acronym. What is it when you use like letters to, what is that word? What's that? Like if we said, what's that? Yeah, a mnemonic device. Thank you. A mnemonic device. So when we say nashhadu, we bear witness in the shahada, right? Nashhadu, we bear witness. This is the nafs, the shaitan for sheen, the hawa, which is that desire. That hawa also means to fall into a deep pit. So that's the kind of desire that the Sharia is there to prevent you, not other types of desires. That's why when the Sahaba thought, the Sharia is, I want to just be focused on Allah, so I'm actually going to become a monk. And the Prophet's telling them, no, I get married and I pray. I fast and I break my fast. I pray and I have times where I don't pray. The Sharia is not there to have us annihilate our basic nature. Does that make sense? And then these are the four enemies of the self. Or your four enemies that you have to deal with. What would dal be? The dunya. This was a mnemonic device presented by Sheikh Ahmadu Bamba, a very amazing scholar of Senegal. His city that he started under a tree that now produces its own electricity and gives loans to the Senegalese government is still there, not even 100 years after he established it. So he said nashhadu. So hawa. So one of the maqsad of the Sharia is to break your hawa, to stop your hawa, to curb your hawa, not your shahwa. So that's why when the Sahaba came and they said we want to leave marriage, or one of the Salman al-Farisi went to Abu Darda and he found his wife complaining. Anybody familiar with this story? Right? So why was his wife complaining? Fast all day and pray all night. And Salman al-Farisi, who understood the maqsad, it's like, that's not the maqsad of the Sharia. That's a manifestation of the Sharia, right? Is the prayer from the Sharia? Yes, it's fasting from the Sharia. But what Salman, because he got up to pray in the night, he said, "Stay, keep sleeping." He got up and he kept saying, sleep. Then at the end of the night, he said, "Now you can get up and pray." And he helped him regulate his fasting too. So he was teaching him the maqsad of the Sharia. These things are preventing the maqsad. It's not to curb your shahwa, it's to curb your desire. You should eat food, you should drink, you should fast, you should pray, you should get married, all of those things, but it's in moderation and it's curbed. And they said he mentions here, he said the defining way to know whether you're following your desire or your shahwa is that if the Sharia ruling comes up, you stop at it. So say somebody likes food, has a shahwa for food. There's nothing wrong essentially with liking food. But somebody might say, I got a lot of desires, man. I have too much shahwa. You know, my shahwa is taking over me. It might be shahwa, but it's only hawa if it makes the decision for you. So if you go to a restaurant and you're like, man, that looks good, go ahead and order it. It's pork, right? It looks good. Now you know that your liking of food is a hawa, it's not a shahwa. And the Sharia is there to help you curb that, to make sure that it stays as a shahwa and is not a hawa. Does that make sense? And this is a recurring theme that you'll see. The other thing to remember, though, is that the Sharia is there to curb the hawa, and it's also not. It's not there to annihilate your human nature. It's not there to annihilate the human nature. Its objective is also not to annihilate your personal temperament. Your personal temperament. So when we read about the Sahaba, do we get this idea that some were Umar's and some were Abu Huraira's? Some were very modest, like Uthman. Do you even hear a lot of stories of Uthman? You don't. Even in the literature, he's very modest. The Prophet ﷺ said that the angels are shy around Uthman. So did Allah, did the Sharia come to say, Uthman, you need to be out there, man. You need to be talking more. You need to be making more of a presence. No, he made his presence, but we don't even see him in a lot of the literature. Everybody had their tabi'ah. Bilal had a tabi'ah and so forth. And so what Islam is, the Sharia, the maqsad is there to do is just to hone that and to bring out the best of it. And the best hadith that shows this is that الناس معادن كمعادن الذهب والفضة. People are ores like the ores of gold and silver. The best of them are in Jahiliyyah, or the best of them in Islam, إذا فقهوا, if they gain understanding. So you at your core, every single one of us, Allah has already defined what your metal is. You just have to format that. Some of us are copper, some of us are gold, some of us are uranium, some of us are lead. You know, we each have some potential, and the maqsad of the Sharia is not to completely change this. And for me, when I read this, Ibn Ajiba was talking about this in his tafsir about jihadun nafs, right? Struggle against yourself. So some people think that struggle against the self is to break the self and annihilate it completely. Ibn Ajiba is saying, no, that's not the struggle of the self. The struggle of the self is to figure out who you are and bring out the best potential in who you are. Not everybody's going to lead a nation. Not everybody can take care of children. Not everybody can start a non-profit organization to provide water in some country. Not everybody's going to be a teacher. Everybody has to figure out what is your core metal, and then now build the Sharia around to be able to fit into that. So now it makes sense when people would come to the Prophet ﷺ and they would say, what is the best of actions? What would he say? Something different every time. So what that's telling us is that he's showing us the maqsad. I don't have this thing here. He's showing us everybody, like the maqsad is the same. The action, don't get caught up in the actions. For one person, his door to Allah is going to be charity. Who's ever found there's one aspect of the, and you don't have to share if you don't, but there's one aspect of the Sharia that's super easy for you, and there's another one that you just can't do. Sadaqah, I'll give everything. I'm not saying me, I'm just a person. I'll give everything. Tahajjud, man, I really struggle with that. Well, don't make it your life's mission to break your nafs to get up there and do tahajjud. If you have facilitation in one area, your jihad is to focus on this area. Is to focus on this area. If Allah has given you a tabi'ah in one area, focus on that. Because wouldn't it be a long time for you to, like, say somebody has serious issues getting up for tahajjud and doing long du'as and really getting into the du'as and making du'a for the ummah. For them to go through that process to annihilate the nafs, and then they're still trying to fit the square into the circle, right? are they going to be as proficient as another person that it comes naturally to a certain point and they're just going to really hone in on that? So that's the maqsad of the Sharia, is to bring that out. And as a proof, the man who said, "Oh Messenger of Allah, give me nasiha," what did he say? Don't get angry. All right? La taghdab. Now, does this mean annihilate anger from your heart? Because what would happen if we annihilated anger from our heart? You become a pacifist. So what? How is that pacifist going to show? You're not going to be angry for Allah. You mentioned kids earlier. You're not going to correct the wrong. Because when we see things that are wrong, you have to be angry, whether it's against the multinational corporations, or whether it's against a kid on the playing field, or whether it's against yourself. You have to have some level of anger. So when the Prophet ﷺ is saying la taghdab, he's not saying don't have anger. The maqsad behind that is now if we look at this is the what. The what, he's saying don't be angry, but we know the maqsad is to serve Allah. So what is he really telling this person? Use it to serve Allah, so don't have that blameworthy anger. Or don't follow up on your anger. Or don't make hasty decisions based on your anger. So a ruling that comes out would be the qadi or the parent or the mufti should not give a qada or a fatwa, or you should not have an interaction when you're angry. Don't have a serious discussion when you're angry. You know how most people get divorced in Islam? When they're angry. If they just close their mouth and just waited 3 days, we would solve a lot of problems. Khalil Center wouldn't be getting as many people coming in, but we would solve a lot of problems. If you just close your mouth when you're angry and don't say the D word. Because then they go like, "Oh, Sheikh, can you get me a fatwa?" Because that's what happens. And there's a lot of other situations. So now he also mentions something interesting. He says that those aspects of yourself that you have no control over preventing or acquiring, there's two types. One is a fitri, is something that's part of your fitra, and then the other thing is a result of action. So, for example, fitra, which is your basic human disposition, is, and he gives us an example. Okay, so for example, courage. Do you see some kids, they're real courageous as little bitty kids. And some people are just some kids are just very timid. All right, so that's a fitra. So you have to understand that that's a fitra. There's other things that are the products they're a product of action, like knowledge. He gives us an example. A product would be knowledge and love. So how does this now have a practical application? Do you have inbuilt in you the cognitive ability to know? Right? Allah has made that. That's part of our fitrah. We're not going to change that. The knowledge, though, you have to actually gain that. But then once you gain it, it's yours. You have it. As an example, he mentions about hub. He mentions a dua here that's when we eat food. It's a beautiful dua. I started making it after I read it in here. Where did it go? No, it's not one that's common in those books. It's actually about love. I can't find it now, but basically it's the Prophet ﷺ saying, the gist of it is, "Oh Allah, you have given us these blessings, make us love you." So the proof of that is that love doesn't come naturally. Love of Allah and His Messenger, we have to look at it. It's not a fitrah. People aren't born with the ability to love Allah and His Messenger. But we have the fitrah, we have the capability to love of Allah, but you have to develop that love. So that's why it's important to to realize that it doesn't come naturally, and that you have to work on it. But you have to work on it within your ability. So you see a lot of hadith, and he mentions a whole list of here. He tells the Sahaba, do what you're able to. Alaykum bima tutiqun. Do what you're able to. It doesn't mean at the level of the level of the daruri. The daruri fard. So this is again we have those three sections: the daruri, tahsini, and then haji, and then takmili. The necessities, needs, and completions. At the level of needs, the 5 daily prayers, that's a daruri thing, right? We all have to do that. So now when we hear the words of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam saying, do what you're able to do, is he talking about the 5 daily prayers? No, he's talking about extra things like tahajjud, sadaqah. Like, don't overburden yourself. Don't overburden yourself thinking that that's part of the jihad, because that's not one of the maqsad of Sharia. There was a man that they found. He made a promise to Allah. He said, this amongst the Sahaba, he's going to fast all day and stand in the sunlight. And I'm really going to make it hard in the desert sun. They brought him to the Prophet ﷺ. He said, forego the standing in the sun, but complete your fast. In all of these instances, he's teaching this main maqsad of the Sharia, that the point of the Sharia is not to annihilate yourself. It's also not, and this is another one, and I know I'm going quickly, but it's, if the Sharia is about preventing harm and bringing benefit, the point of the Sharia is not to give us mashaqqa, not to give us hardship. The point of the Sharia is not to give us hardship. And this is, we could tie this into a philosophical discussion, like, what's the point of life? Is the point of life suffering? Well, if we look at it from the Sharia aspect, if Allah created us and put a Sharia for us to know Him, the point of the Sharia is not to create hardship. And since that's the point, then now you have all these dispensations, you have all these exceptions to the rules, that when that hardship is present, that hardship can be removed through other through other rulings and balancings. Is that from the church over there? I thought it was a party or a gym workout when I first got here. Okay, so he mentions a lot of very good examples about this idea that the point of the Sharia is not to annihilate yourself. It's also not to annihilate your personal temperament, and it's not to create hardship in your life. And he mentions a number of stories. I wish I had time to have gone through those. And it's not to annihilate desire. It's just to prevent hawa. Okay, and then I'll go into the next section, which is the fourth and the last one, which is actually the breaking the hawa is under the fourth area, which is what is the purpose of this taklif, which is not to break your hawa, but to curb the desire, the shahwa. Another thing he mentions, and I'll just end on this, I think that's pretty much what I can cover, and then we'll open it up for I'll end on these 2 points. One is that the maqasid of the Sharia are what's called qat'iyya. You have to have a proof that is qat'i. The qat'i proof is the definitive proof. It's not a speculative proof. It's not a dhanni proof. A definitive proof, like, is alcohol haram? Is it haram in the Sharia? Yes. Where do we know that from? The Quran. Is there any ambiguity about that? No ambiguity. So that is a qat'i proof, that's a qat'i hukum that comes from the realm of revealed law. A qat'i proof was, does the sun rise in the east? Well, is that ambiguous? Speculative? No, that's clear cut. It's a clear cut. That's why in Arabic it says qat'i. It's a clear cut proof. So when we talk about the rulings of the Sharia and even understanding the Maqasid, they come from the Sharia, not from reason and not from convention. Remember those three areas of judgments that we talked about? So there's لا مدخل للعقل في الشريعة. We're going to use our intellect, but we're not going to make our intellect the defining factor. And as an example, a good example to illustrate this is it permissible by sunnah to wipe over socks? It is. There's just a difference amongst the madhab. Does it have to be leather, waterproof, dress socks, all of that? We're not going to get into that discussion right now, but you can wipe over socks. Do you have to wipe over the bottom and the top, or just one? And if so, which one? The top. So Ali karamallahu wajhah wa radiyallahu anhu said, this sharia is a sharia of naql, of transmission, not one of aql. Because if it was based on aql, the maqsad, and he discusses it here, the maqsad of tahara, preparation for prayer, the maqsad in general is cleanliness, right? It's cleanliness. But then some things don't fit that category, like wiping over the top. Because if we said, well, the maqsad is cleanliness, then which would it make more sense to wipe over? The bottom. But the top is fard and the bottom is sunnah. So this is a reminder also to keep us humble. Look, there's some things you don't understand. Even in ibadah, even if we were to be able to assign a qasid, an objective of the sharia, that tahara is for cleanliness, well then it would follow that you should wipe the bottom of the sock. It would also follow that you can't do tayammum. Was that what you were thinking? So that kind of just throws you for a loop. It's kind of like when people think they got it all figured out, then here comes a platypus, a mammal that lays eggs, right? Whoa, that's the black swan. Anybody familiar with that book? It just throws everything through a loop, and it reminds you, look, you don't understand what's going on. So even in this process of us assigning objectives to the Sharia, we have to remember that we don't understand everything that's going on. So even though we understand that in general, tahara and purity is for cleanliness, not everything fits into that. And that's why Ali said this deen is a deen of transmission. So we need those clear-cut definitive proofs to give us the rulings, and then now we work on understanding the maqasid. And another proof that they say that the Sharia rulings and the maqasid have to come from revelation and cannot come from intellect alone. And I'm not saying we deny the intellect, it's just that we use our intellect to engage with that. Just remember the beginning, the story. Did the Prophet ﷺ tell Mu'adh exactly what to do and not go out of that? No. Was he encouraging him to use his intellect to engage with the revelation? Yes. Those two groups of Sahaba that made two different choices, were they using their intellect to engage with that? That's what is a point, but it's not pure intellect. If we left it to pure intellect, the example is that after the death of Isa alayhi salam, and the faith started changing, and the practice of the faith started changing, what is one thing that the Christians instituted into their deen? وَرَهْبَانِيَّةً ابْتَدَعُوهَا. Right? The monasticism that they introduced as a bid'ah. فَمَا رَعَوْهَا حَقَّ رِعَايَتِهَا. But they didn't take care of it. So Allah is talking about something that they instituted as a practice, as part of the religion, and He says ibtada'uha, they made it up. He said, but even that they didn't fulfill their objectives of that. But this is showing that without a connection to the wahi, if they just make it up based on their reason, like what if we were to say, you know what? How about since we feel so good and we really want to thank Allah, why don't we pray 5 rak'ahs for dhuhr? It doesn't make could it make sense logically? Like if we broke the prayer down to just a meditation practice, and it says, well, I mean, if you're getting that much benefit out of 4, throw in a couple extra ones, right? Okay, so there's no aql that we're going to allow into that. It's based on wahi. The other proof is that if people don't have a connection to wahi, to revelation, they're not going to figure it out. They're not going to figure it out. Now, this is a debate amongst the scholars of Aqidah, and this was a big debate with amongst the philosophers. The philosophers felt that a prophet is a prophet because he can attain that through his own reasoning and intellect and reflection. That's what the philosophers amongst the Muslims, and they butted heads with the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah about this. And the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah was saying, no, a prophet can only be a prophet through revelation. They can't know these things. So it's not prophethood and becoming a messenger is not attainable except through wahi. Additionally, people cannot understand the rulings of the Sharia through intellect and reason alone. It has to be reason working with revelation, which I think is very important in our day and age, because you have a lot of people philosophizing about the Quran, people who are coming, as it say, people who are attacking Islam, and very intellectual people. I mean, they're very intellectual people, and they're trying to engage with the Quran on their intellectual level, and we're saying you're coming it from you're trying to make this hukum aqli, like there's a certain aspect that you have to understand the revelation and where we're coming from. The last thing that I'll mention, and then I'll open it up to questions, is actually I think I'll end there. That fourth area was the point of the Sharia is not to break the hawa. So if you want to sum it up, we started off with 1, 2, 3. The Sharia in the first place is to preserve those 3 areas, and the preservation of those is in preventing harm and bringing in benefit. The understanding, and the understanding has to be in the Arabic language, and there's a number of discussions that fall under that. And then the responsibility of what it intends. The intention is not to change who you are as a human being, as an individual. It's just to form you. And then the fourth is so that the mukallaf submits to it, not that they break their temperament, but they just curb the desires. Whew, that was tough, wasn't it? Yes. Oh, the illah versus the ta'abbudi? Okay, actually, thank you. That was the last one. So when we talk about, and this fits into understanding what is the intention, there's two, the hukum can only be one of 2 areas. It could either be because of an illah, a reason, or it could be ta'abbudi. Okay, so if it's a reason or if it's ta'abbudi. So if we say that this hukum is ta'abbudi, that regardless of the even though there's an objective, so the objective of worship is humility before Allah. Is humility before Allah. But we're not going to change that. There's no way in the world that we can change the number of rak'ahs of dhuhr, what we wash in wudu. We can't come and we say, well, it's actually cleaner to, or for example, here's a modern. Has anybody heard of the debate of horizontal cut slaughter as opposed to vertical cut slaughter? You haven't heard this, right? Well, you're eating some of that meat, so we should as a consumer demand from the producers that just let us know what's going on. Like, we don't have to say machine cut, hand slaughtered, Ahl al-Kitaba. Just label it. Just say this is Ahl al-Kitab machine slaughtered chicken. This is Muslim hand slaughtered, and let the consumer make the decisions. But what's happening now is a lot of these certification places, they're saying, well, this is halal, and now we're going to stamp it as halal. So an example is Ifanka, one of the main certifiers. So they certify as halal vertically cut slaughtered beef. So a dhabh is like according to the Sunnah. According to the Sunnah, and I know this is not really good for the video, like they're gonna go, oh look, he's doing this signs, Okay, according to the Sunnah, there's only 2 ways of slaughtering an animal: either a horizontal cut across the throat, or if it's an animal like a cow or and definitely in a camel, right here above the collarbone, if you feel that soft spot, that you would puncture that with the tool that you're using for the slaughter. It's called nahar. Those are the only two ways of slaughtering an animal. So now Ifanka and other Muslim and other fiqh boards, they have allowed for, because in modern slaughter they'll hang the cow upside down, and then they'll start right here and they'll cut down like this, a vertical cut. I don't know exactly how it goes because there were rib cages there, but they do a vertical cut. So it's not a horizontal cut that's in accordance with the Sunnah, and it's not a nahar, which is also in accordance with the Sunnah. It's a new method. So now what they're saying is that this hukum, where the way the Prophet taught us to slaughter, there's a illah to it. There's a reason to it. And the reason is, get as much blood out of the animal as you can. And so modern methods would say that the vertical cut, you actually get more blood out of the animal, so we're going to say this is halal. The other side of the argument is that no, that's a ta'abbudi thing, because there's many ways that you can slaughter an animal. Couldn't you slaughter it from the back of the head? You could slaughter it from the front, you could slaughter it from the side, but the sunnah is here. So the majority of scholars of tradition have said that it is a ta'abbudi ruling, the way we slaughter. It defies some aspects of reason. And because it's not specifically for a reason, an animal that is hunted, even if it's not slaughtered that way, it's allowed. So this animal in this specific situation is allowed, but you can't hunt a domestic animal. Does that make sense? So now the illah and the reasons. Okay, so this is, if it's ta'abbudi, that's it. We don't have any interaction. We have to do it as it says. We're not going to change it. If it's because of a illah, then we can engage in it. So staying away from najasa, there's staying away from alcohol, there's a specific reason to it. If that reason, then now we say preservation of life, there's a reason, and we can contain that, the reason that's found in alcohol, then it would be permissible to use alcohol in medicinal purposes. That's one example. The other thing about the illah though, and he mentioned, Imam al-Shatibi mentions that, he said even if we assign a reason to a ruling, we also have to remember that, or let me pose it as a question, is it possible that if we assign a reason to a ruling that there's actually other reasons that we don't know about? Right? So that's what he said, you have to be humble even when that's done. And so it's not that, it's a very easy, we assigned the ruling, we assigned a reason based on our intellect, and so we're going to act accordingly. And I'll give you a very good example. This actually, I was embroiled in a debate a few years ago with some of my colleagues in the Maliki school, and the rule, and this is one of the things that I wanted to mention as a case study, and I think we'll end on that. It's already 1 o'clock. But who's heard of the discussion on whether or not a woman can travel by herself? Oh, sounds like, see, that side of the room's like, oh, man, here we go, right? Okay, you've heard it, right? All right, now, what is the rule, out of curiosity? Can a woman travel without a mahram? Yes or no? Yes? Depends on mileage. What else? Just tell me what you know. This is like a, no, it's not permissible, right? It's in public settings. Okay. Okay. So actually, from all 4 people who responded, we've contained the discussion. So the Prophet ﷺ said that it is not permissible for a woman who believes in Allah and His Messenger and the final day to travel without a mahram half of a day. In another hadith, 1 day. In another hadith, 2 days. In another hadith, 3 days. Okay, so now we've already opened up like, whoa, which one are we going to go with? So half a day is 12 hours. Now this also goes back to when we were saying, if the maqsad of the Shari'ah is according to what the Arabs understood, then when the Arabs would say a day's travel, a week's travel, 2 days travel, what were they talking about? Distance, a specific distance, how fast you can travel with a specific camel in a specific way. That was their measurement. So we can't use today's understanding of a day, that's one argument. We can't use a day. We have to look at what the Arabs have said. So they have assigned it as a distance. But now here comes the debate. Can we assign it as a distance, which is in accordance with the way the Arabs used it? Or can we keep it general the way the Prophet said it 1 day and assign a time limit? 12 hours, 24, 48, 72 hours. That's, now we've already got like a discussion there. The other thing is that if the Prophet ﷺ said in all sound hadiths, all these 4 categories, which one are we going to go with? So some of the scholars, they chose the 24 days, and they had a reason why they chose that hadith over the other ones. But we've already said, look, there's other possible ways of understanding that 24 hours or that 1 day journey, which actually comes out to be the same in like a journey of travel, which is about 50 miles. Is it 50 miles? I guess, yeah, 50 miles. Yeah, it's about 50 miles. So if we say 1 day, it's 50 miles. Now, then they have to say, then this is the discussion that I was having with another person, He was saying, because I was saying it's permissible for a woman to travel without a mahram as long as it's safe, because the prohibition is based on a illah, it's based on a reason, which is preservation of her safety. And he was saying, no, it's actually based on ta'abbudi. It doesn't. And then I broke it down. I said, no, if we're going to go ta'abbudi, here's all of the problems that will occur if we assign this as a ta'abbudi. One of the ones that I mentioned is that if you're saying, I said, okay, so if you're going to start counting travel, when do we start counting travel? At what point? You're fasting, you're shortening your prayers. At what point do you start counting your travel? Outside your city limits. Well, what if you're a Bedouin living in a tent? Where do you start? As soon as you leave your tent. So if we say it's ta'abbudi, and she has as soon as she leaves her tent, she's got to have a mahram. If she's going to go down to the, like if she's, it doesn't make sense. So I was arguing. We're still both in our camps, but the other proof is there's a hadith. It's called Hadith al-Dha'ina, and it's a Sahih hadith. I believe it's in Bukhari. But the Prophet ﷺ said there will come a time when what? And she doesn't fear except Allah, right? She can. There will come a time that a woman can make her journey to Mecca, and she will only fear Allah. And so the scholars that said that the whole setup of the prohibition of the woman traveling without a mahram is based on illah, which is her safety. And so the Prophet giving those terms was based on different people asking different questions. So depending on where they're coming from in the Arabian Peninsula, it's like, okay, because somebody said, can a woman travel without a mahram? Half a day, 2 days, 3 days, 1 day, based on their situation. Under an understanding that it's a illah thing, and it's based on her safety. And the proof that supports this is the hadith of Dha'ina, that the Prophet said there will come a time that a woman can travel by herself and not fear anything other than Allah. A woman of taqwa, right? She only fears Allah of taqwa. And so if we say that it's if it's based on illah, and this is even some of the early Maliki scholars said, this whole discussion about a woman traveling on her own is just in a desolate area where there's nobody around. وَأَمَّا فِي الْقَافِلَةِ الْعَظِيمَةِ, as if she's in a large caravan of people, then it's permissible, even if, for whatever reason. Now, there's a difference of opinion amongst like if you look at it from a purely fiqh angle, the argument is very strong. You can find proof in the Maliki school that says nope, it's ta'abbudi, 1 day with a mahram, that's it. The Shafi'is also, you can find that. The Hanafi, the Hanbalis, you can find that. But for me now, when it comes down to actually personal application, when a sister is making a choice of whether or not to travel, is she doing something haram? Or for a person who has a daughter, a wife, a sister, and in terms of encouraging them to go on that travel or not. Now the question is, which ruling am I going to take? Which ruling should you take? Because I can't enforce it, right? We can't enforce it. But something that's going to, what I feel, something that is going to help a person make that choice is understanding some of this, so that when you make your ijtihad in terms of application, it's hopefully better aligned than just a blanket or throwing paint on the wall. Another example that I wanted to give is a few years ago. Okay, the issue of anyway, I'll leave it up as questions now. Yes. Good question. The question is, in making the distinction between the illah and the ta'abbudi, that's based on sources of revelation. So this is not based on reason. We have to use the revelation to make that. So even like in the argument that I was making, that it's based on safety, and as long as you can attain safety, it's permissible for a woman to travel around the world, no limit. She can travel. I had to use, and we have to use, proofs that are religious proofs to back up our reasoning. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Right.
So what is the, is that, how do we understand that situation?
Oh, good question. So the question is, some people eat food with alcohol in it now. A lot of flavorings have alcohol. or people cook with wine. Before we even start the question of the maqasid, we have to understand the khilaf of the fiqh, because that's what Imam Shatibi was doing, right? He's looking at all of the different fiqh rulings amongst the madahib. He's looking at the difference of usul, and now he's trying to piece together the maqasid. So in this issue of eating food that has touched najasa, we have to go back and find out what are the fiqh rulings. First of all, is wine najasa or not? Because, all types of alcohol are considered tahar according to the Hanafis, except for wine. So if it's ethyl grain alcohol, they consider it tahar, and they have their proofs. Imam Shafi'i, all wine, all intoxicants. Imam Malik and Imam Shafi'i, all wine are considered all liquid intoxicants, whether they're from barley or beer or potatoes, right? Vodka. Couldn't end the session without another vodka mention, right? It's all considered najasa. So now first we have to establish that. So according to that opinion of the Hanafi, if it's ethyl alcohol, like perfumes, like colognes, if it has the ethyl alcohol, is that considered najasa or not? So we have to go through that at a fiqh level really and see, like, okay, now there's a valid khilaf about it. Everybody has their reasoning. What are you going to choose? That's the question. And I'll end with this. There's a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said, "Istafti qalbak." Right? Seek fatwa from your heart. We've all heard this, and a lot of people use this improperly. They're like, what do I think is the ruling? Let me see what my heart says. Seek the fatwa from your heart. That's not what the hadith is saying. The hadith says, al-birru what? The bir, righteousness, is what your heart is tranquil, feels tranquil with. And ithim is what you get this like hak of your heart. It just bothers you. And so do what makes your heart tranquil, وَإِنْ أَفْتَاكَ النَّاسِ, even if people give you fatwa. So for me, like, that's what I'm saying. If we're in a situation where it's a country and there's no more situations like this, if we were all working within one paradigm of a madhab, you can say, look, here's the ruling, this is what you have to do. But the reality is, as soon as you mention stuff right now, people are going to look up, they're like, well, this sheikh said. So this to me is a tool these are tools that you can use to say, how are you going to make the best decision with all of these fatwas around? I know that doesn't answer the question specifically, but that's going to be your journey to figure out the answer. Any other final questions? We're already 10 minutes over, so I want to wrap up before, yes.
Something that's been coming to my mind is the idea of following. A lot of people say we want to follow the principles of Islam, the values of Islam. We don't want to get stuck on fiqh. And then sometimes we have people on both extremes, right?
Mhm.
Like where we're not following fiqh because we're following the principles, right? So we're even getting things now. Maybe you can comment on it, like questions like the Ghamladi versus the reason of like LGBTQ.
Yeah.
Right, and then the sisters wearing the hijab. So, what do you say to that, and where do we find the balance
Between those two?
values?
Okay, that's a very good question, and I hope I'm summarizing it properly. It's basically, if we're talking about, some people say we shouldn't follow fiqh, we should follow the principles, and others are saying, well, no, we have to follow the fiqh regardless of the principles. And what I would say is that when we're talking about the principles, knowing these principles is not going to give us the ruling, is not going to give us the hukum. The hukums are already there. Their hukums are established by the mujtahideen who have preserved this ummah. And Imam Shatibi also mentions this, that we don't approach the Quran or the Hadith directly. We have to approach it through scholarship. And this is also something that's missing in the discussion when the Islamophobes and the critics of Islam, when they're approaching the Hadith and the Quran directly, which we're saying as Muslims we don't do that. We go through our scholarship. So if we're going through our scholarship and we're trying to find out what they have said, if we have, and they have given a hukum on it, we're not going to change it based on these principles. So I'm not going to, somebody understands the maqasid down to a T, cannot come and say Imam Malik was wrong. Another mujtahid can. But now we have to look and say, what is, first of all, we have to look at the fiqh ruling, and we have to submit to that and say, okay, if there's a valid difference of opinion, what is the spectrum that we're dealing with? But now the question is, what am I going to do? What choice am I going to take? So if we use as an example LGBTQ community, is it permissible to act upon those feelings by Islam, by Sharia? No. And we're not going to change it. Even though there are people and they've written books about it and says they're looking at the principles, we are not going to change that ruling. It is haram. Adultery is haram. Fornication is haram. All of these things are haram. Acting upon homosexuality is haram. But now, going back to changing the person's disposition, is that the maqsad of the Sharia? Can a person have an inclination towards, having a sexual attraction to a member of the same gender? It's possible. And the Sharia is not there to remove that. It's just there to say you can't have this act. Now, in terms of our interaction with people, whether it's this issue or other issues, now we can say, how far am I going to go in talking to this person about it? How is this going to affect my other interactions with that person? Is it going to affect neighborly interactions? Absolutely not. Is it going to affect employment? No. If I was an employer and I was given between two persons, this one Muslim who wakes up at the Tahajjud and memorizes the Quran and all that stuff, and somebody else who's from the LGBT community, but I'm trying to have a transaction here, right? And I'm trying to hire somebody who's the best person for the job. Is it okay for me to go with the person who's from that community, even though morally I may differ for them? Yes. And might I do that? Yeah, I might. And we might have a complete, we can engage in conversations. We might even sit down for a meal together. It's not going to create this like an antagonism between us and the other person. So it's to me the whole the point about understanding the principles helps us in the application of the fiqh rulings. Does that answer? So I don't think it's an either or. It's not like we go with the principles or we go with the fiqh. No, we have to bring them both together. And then once we see them both together, then I'll give you an example. A non-Muslim entering a masjid. It was a fiqh discussion. Abu Hanifa says the non-Muslim can enter, absolutely. Imam al-Shafi'i says only if he's been given permission by the Muslim. Imam Malik cannot enter, absolutely. What are we going to do here in America? I'm Maliki and I love Medina. I love the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Malik used to teach right there in Medina. I love Imam Malik, but I'm not going to follow that rule here. But am I going to say Malik's wrong? No. There was a bus maybe about 15 years ago. 6 buses of junior high school kids came up to the Saudi masjid in DC. They wanted to do a tour. Somebody came out and said, you have to ask all of these young women who's on their monthly cycle, and they're not allowed in. And the boys they're like, this is gross. Everybody back on the bus and go home. Now, that person, did he have a fiqh right? Like within fiqh, within fiqh though. Did he have a fiqh ruling that he could say that? Yes, he had the Maliki support. In fact, he had, I would say it like, actually I take it back, he didn't, because the Maliki say absolutely not. The Shafi'i say yes with permission, even if they're in a state of janaba. And use as a proof, the Bedouins used to come into the masjid and take their shahada in the masjid. Abu Hanifa says they can enter absolutely. So even in the application of fiqh, he didn't have a proper application of fiqh. But even if we were to say that somebody is going to take a proper fiqh ruling, we could have now a discussion, say, look, brother, let's now we're going to talk about the principle, and we're going to say let's take Abu Hanifa's, because in our situation we feel this aligns more with the objective of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted in the first place. Does that make sense? And that's where we can have a discussion. But I personally, anybody that's going to start saying, they are men and we are men, Abu Hanifa and Malikism, and say no, Sunni Islam has been preserved by the academic tradition of these scholars at their head, and we have to work within that paradigm. Any other questions other than how do you become Maliki? Yes? Right.
The kind of phrase that came to my mind is like, do the ends justify the means?
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the answer was yes. And so I was just curious, like, how you would think about like that particular phrasing, like, do the ends justify the means?
Okay, that's a good question. Do the ends justify the means? And this is more of a discussion in usul, the wasa'il and the ends. Do they justify the means? Could you give me an example of what you're asking specifically? Because I could tackle it at a couple of different ways. Okay. I see. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I'll start with this. Who drives a car? Everybody drives a car here. who rides in a car, you know, I mean, or let's just say who drives a car. Anybody who drives a car, we all have insurance, right? Is insurance a permissible sale? No. So we've already started the compromise. We've just by merely stepping, if you're in a Muslim country, you have to have insurance. If you're here, so we've already stepped into the discussion of we are compromising on the rules in terms of like seeing. Now the discussion is how far are we going to take that, and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense in terms of the ends justifying the means. Like say somebody says, okay, I want to build a masjid and I'm going to take out an interest loan. So they would say, you know, does the ends, which is a good thing, does it justify the means? If we were to say this is aside from is it a necessity or not, if you're in a situation where you can get something, you can get the objective without going into this haram, then no, it doesn't make sense to justify. But say you were in a situation, I'm trying to think of an actual practical example. Say there was a community with absolutely no masjid, no Islamic school. The Muslim community is a minority in the community. The only way they can actually come together and have a place is they have to take a loan from the bank. Does it make sense over there? Yes, it makes sense. That makes sense to justify the ends, riba, in their situation. But this is all an ijtihad of application, and this is where the community comes in. If we present something to a community of people who have good familiarity with the Sharia, and we have a room like this, we could come up and we could say, like, actually, if everybody here studied the Sharia, like say everybody in this room studied for about 4 years of straight study, we could sit down here and we could have a council that we come up with like fatwas. Because even if you're not the super best, you know, you haven't studied 20, 30, 40 years, the combined effort of our intellectual endeavor within the Sharia, we're gonna more closely align with what should be properly applied. And this is why in the Maliki school, in the absence of a qadi, of a judge, you can get a group of Muslims together, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 10, however many, and they can actually enact rulings, give qada rulings. What time did they pray here? 1:30? 1:45. Okay, so maybe 5 more minutes of questions. Yes. That's what I'm presenting in why we should study the Maqasid. Yeah. Correct. Yeah. Although some people are making that argument. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, I see. Yeah. No, I suggest the question was if we're talking about that the maqasid is to understand the fiqh rulings in a situation like in raising children and helping them understand Islam. Do we start with the principles or do we start with the fiqh rulings? I would say it could be a combination of both. It's just like in one of the articles I think they were talking about, the author said, you know, his child asked him, okay, we stop it's a red light. Well, why do we stop at a red light? Okay, so the fiqh ruling is stop at a red light. Slow down when it's yellow. You know, it doesn't mean like get through the intersection, right? And green means go. So that's a fiqh ruling. The maqsad though is he can talk about the importance of maintaining traffic, how the ruler, you know, can make a decision, you know, can go into the usul, and the maqsad is essentially in that situation is preservation of life, right? And facilitation of preservation of property. There's a number of things. So I think that it's you can do both at the same time, but especially with young children, younger children can't understand abstract ideas. They understand more concrete ideas. So even though they're asking why, we have to give it to them in piecemeal, giving them the fiqh ruling, and then as they're able to understand, here's the reasoning behind it. So I would say a combination of both. And I think it's a very good question, because I think in this day and age, we're no longer in a time where we can say, this is Islam, just do it, sami'na wa ata'na, we hear and we obey. They're going to be in situations in public schools, in college, from their Muslim peers, from their non-Muslim peers, from atheists, from devout Christians, from everybody's asking them, why? And it's not enough for them to be able to say, because that's what it says in the Quran. I think it needs to be developed more. Two final questions. Okay, barakallahu feekum. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all tawfiq. Jazakumullahu khair.